Corners, later Media Watch and China Tonight. Log into ABC iView and add shows to your watch list.
Tonight, emergency expansion. The state government to double the size of its virtual emergency department team. Also tonight, the daughter of a missing Adelaide grandmother travels to regional Victoria to search for her mum. An unprecedented heat wave and dangerous fires spread across Europe. And a birdie blitz sees Cameron Smith become the first Australian in more than 30 years to win the British Open.
I feel like I can breathe.
Good evening, Tamara Oudyn with ABC News. The Andrews government's planning to bolster Victoria's virtual emergency department so that more people can be seen online. The aim is to divert up to 500 patients a day away from our overstretched hospital system. But experts are warning consulting doctors and nurses via video isn't a cure-all. Leanne Wong reports.
11-year-old Jake Patragoulis was riding his bike when he fell off and broke his arm.
Yeah, so I broke this part and this small part. It hurt a lot.
Unsure at first of how serious the injury was, Mum Valerie contacted the virtual emergency department.
I don't really want to be going and sitting in a hospital for hours. It wasn't life-threatening, but that he potentially did have a broken arm.
Within minutes, she had a consultation with a doctor who organised an X-ray appointment.
Pretty much walked straight in. He had the imaging done within, I think, 15 minutes. The doctor then saw him within another 15-20 minutes. We were out of the hospital in an hour. It was fabulous.
The virtual ED has already treated more than 28,000 Victorians, with almost three-quarters of them able to avoid going to hospital. The expansion is part of the government's $162 million announcement on Sunday to support Ambulance Victoria.
That means there's less trips, less transport, more ambulances freed up to attend to the next 000 emergency, the next lights and sirens emergency.
It's not for life-threatening emergencies, but triage nurses will call an ambulance if patients need. And unlike most telehealth appointments, consultations take place over video.
We can actually see patients, we can see the problem that they're having, and it's pretty easy off the back to see whether they need escalated care or whether we can keep them at home.
As part of its expansion, aged care residents are now eligible to use the service. The government's also trialling more flexible rostering for paramedics and real-time monitoring of ED capacity. Officials say an average virtual ED case takes 40 to 60 minutes to resolve, compared to wait times at some hospital emergency departments which have blown out to more than 9 hours. But doctors say it's not a replacement for in-person care.
Particularly if there's an important requirement for physical examination or assessment of a lump. So this is not the panacea. It's not going to solve all problems, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
This is all too little too late. You know, we're a few months out from an election and miraculously, the Premier's pulled some money out of the war chest.
The government says 2,000 healthcare workers are furloughed across the state each day because of COVID. Leanne Wong, ABC News, Melbourne.
Australia could be left with tens of millions of surplus COVID vaccine doses, with fears many will simply go to waste. Like many countries, Australia over-ordered vaccines early in the pandemic in case some options didn't pass the trial stage. Now a review is underway looking at what to do with the huge numbers of doses that'll probably never be used. Tom Lowry reports from Canberra.
Less than a year after COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, the first Pfizer doses landed in Australia. More plane loads would follow.
Australia really participated in a bigger trend that we've seen worldwide of wealthy countries buying up far more doses of COVID-19 vaccines than they needed.
Australia inked deals with AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna and Novavax. The government purchased about 250 million vaccines, roughly 10 for every one Australian. The most recent arrival is Novavax, and it's hardly been touched.
In the emergency of a pandemic, it makes sense to have given ourselves a lot of options, but we do need to review that very closely and decide how we can do it better next time.
The new government has already ordered a review of Australia's vaccine stocks.
I'd want to have a range of options in front of us as to what to do with any surplus vaccines we were contractually required to take.
There's nothing more tragic than to literally throw out life-saving vials of vaccine.
Australia has already donated more than 40 million jabs to the Indo-Pacific, but donating potentially tens of millions more to low-income countries might not be straightforward. In the early stages of the pandemic, it made sense to provide plenty of vaccine options. There was no guarantee any would work, and thankfully most did. Soon the Albanese government will start ordering new vaccines targeting the Omicron variant. Some want to see a different approach taken, so poorer countries are not left behind.
It's very concerning that 2.5 years into the pandemic, we're still seeing a situation where wealthy countries are hoarding vaccines.
The best way to procure and deliver those to the wider world is to do that together as a partnership.
A more collaborative approach to a global challenge. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
The daughter of a South Australian grandmother has travelled to regional Victoria to join the search for her missing mum. Colleen South has been missing for weeks and her car has been found abandoned. Victoria Police says the disappearance has not yet been deemed suspicious, but her family disagrees.
58-year-old Colleen South has been missing since early July and her family are desperate to find her.
We need her home. We just want the police to take this seriously because she's a human being.
She's warm-natured and friendly and a loving mother and a loving grandmother.
Colleen South was seen in the suburb of Renown Park in Adelaide on the 1st of July. On the 3rd of July, her car was found abandoned on a remote road about 15 kilometres east of Witcherproof in northeast Victoria. Police say they've conducted an extensive land and air search of the area surrounding the car. But her daughter wants more done and has begun searching the area too. Colleen South's medicine and wallet were found on the ground outside the car.
We don't know why she left all her belongings behind.
She hasn't contacted her daughter. She would always be in contact with Veronica.
Colleen does have a medical condition. Her disappearance is out of character. So Victoria Police has been working tirelessly and closely with South Australian Police since the report of her disappearance.
Victoria Police now have carriage of the investigation, but the family are concerned it didn't happen quick enough.
There's been a lot of red tape and bureaucracy frustration between the two states. We're dealing with missing a loved one and desperately wanting to know where she is and that she's safe and alive.
There are questions about a message found near the car.
On the very last page of the journal, she wrote, "Help me please." So there was a note found with a plea for help.
The forensic examination of the scene and the vehicle would obviously reveal more, but at this stage there is nothing to suggest that there is any suspicion around Colleen's disappearance.
Her family and friends aren't giving up.
The only way we can keep going each day is to remain hopeful.
I'm going to find you, Mum.
Kate Ashton, ABC News.
An Australian teenager who was forced into Syria by his brother, an Islamic State recruiter, is believed to have died just months after begging for help. Yusuf Zahab's family, based in Sydney, says they're heartbroken and angry over a tragedy that could have been prevented. Tim Swanston reports.
Amid a violent siege on a Syrian prison, 17-year-old Yusuf Zahab issued this desperate plea.
I'm scared if I die any time. Please, I need any help.
It would turn out to be his final contact with family. In the offensive between IS fighters and Kurdish-led forces, the teenager said he'd been wounded.
I spoke to his mother in the camps just a few weeks ago. She was crying and inconsolable, asking for information about her son.
Relatives assume the worst. We are devastated to learn of the passing of our beloved Yusuf Zahab. We are heartbroken and angry because Yusuf didn't need to die.
I think it says a lot about the care taken, for this child, that no one knows ultimately his exact fate.
I haven't been briefed on that. That's obviously tragic news for the family, horrific news if that's the case.
At 11 years old, Yusuf was forced into Syria by his older brother and Islamic State recruiter Mohammed. After the fall of IS, his family was taken to camps. Because of his age, Yusuf was separated and taken to the Syrian prison.
He at no time had any agency over his life. He didn't make any major decision that affected any part of his life, and now it appears that we've lost him.
The Foreign Affairs Department says it's trying to confirm reports of Yusuf Zahab's death, and its ability to provide consular help to Australians in Syria is extremely limited. But this has renewed calls for the federal government to repatriate these families from Syria.
Unfortunately, Yusuf's death, I think, is going to really drive home how urgent this issue is, that we need to bring these Australian citizens home as soon as possible.
To protect them from the same consequences. Tim Swanston, ABC News, Sydney.
The Federal Treasurer has warned real wages will continue to fall this year, blaming an inflation spike for eroding pay increases. Jim Chalmers will hand down an economic update when Parliament returns next week, warning it'll be confronting for Australians. Jane Norman reports from Canberra.
Fresh from a G20 meeting with his international counterparts, the Treasurer's returned to Australia with a pessimistic outlook.
The world economy is a difficult, if not dangerous place right now.
Jim Chalmers will outline just how difficult and dangerous when he presents an economic statement to federal Parliament next week, updating the key forecasts underpinning the budget.
The news in that statement will be, in many ways, confronting.
A year ago, the Reserve Bank forecast an inflation rate of 1.5% for December 2022. 6 months later, it was tipped to be 2.25%. In February, that jumped to 3.25% and then to 5.9% in May. The RBA boss has already warned it's likely to be closer to 7%.
I think it'll be confronting in terms of real wages because there is no credible economic forecaster in Australia right now who thinks that wages growth is going to keep up with inflation.
Even so, the Treasurer is proposing little in the way of immediate cost of living relief, again dousing expectations that a temporary cut to the fuel excise could be extended beyond September.
We can't afford to continue that petrol price relief forever. We can't do everything that we would like to do. We can't even afford the good ideas that people put to us.
Jim Chalmers is spending a lot of time effectively saying it's all too hard and looking backwards. What's the plan?
The Treasurer is trying to condition Australians to the bad news he'll be delivering next week, while managing expectations about how much the government can do given the constraints on the budget. However, the demands on Labor are unlikely to let up, as the backflip over the pandemic leave payments has demonstrated. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
Victoria's almond growers are calling for the urgent creation of a border bubble so they can bring in bees from New South Wales. Almond orchards require hundreds of thousands of hives each year to pollinate their crop when it blossoms. But an outbreak of the deadly varroa mite around Newcastle forced Victoria to close the border to New South Wales beehives earlier this month. Hives from other states have been booked to fill the gap, but with almond crops due to blossom next week, growers say they'll be 80,000 hives short of what's needed. The Almond Board of Australia has proposed a biosecurity bubble around northwest Victoria that could allow pollination by New South Wales bees from outside the varroa mite detection area. The proposal is currently being considered by Agriculture Victoria. Well, it was forecast to be the coldest day of the year here in Melbourne today, but it didn't quite work out that way. Annie Kearney's here to tell us what happened.
Good evening, Tam. Not quite. It was one of our coldest days of this year, but not the coldest. A bit of sunshine peeking through in the city tipped us over into the 11s. We reached a top of 11.4 just after lunch. If you ventured outside today, you'd know it's been chilly. But while I was rugged up in a puffer jacket, the icy blast we're experiencing didn't stop these keen swimmers at the sea bars. The run of cold weather isn't over, though. We're still on track for another record this week. On Wednesday, if we drop to 1 degree, it'll be our coldest morning in 4 years. I'll have the rest of our chilly forecast later in the bulletin, Tam.
Thanks, Annie. Still to come this hour, the homeowners trapped in a building defects nightmare.
The risk of purchasing an apartment with defects is still very high. The owners are still at the mercy of the developers.
You're forced into a process that is never ending, expensive, draining.
Plus, a knockabout bloke from Brisbane snagged the British Open. That's coming up.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has sacked his head of state security and the country's top prosecutor over allegations many of their employees are colluding with Russia. The firing of Ivan Bakanov and Irina Venediktova was announced on the president's website. Mr. Zelensky says more than 650 cases of treason and collaboration with Russia have been opened up against more than 60 officials in the two agencies. Ms. Venediktova has played a key role in the prosecution of war crimes since Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Ukraine says at least 40 people have been killed in Russian shelling of urban areas since Thursday. In France, more than 16,000 people have been evacuated as fires spread across the Mediterranean in extreme heat. The European Union has warned the severe conditions are linked to climate change. In recent days, more than 1,000 people have died in the heatwave in Portugal and Spain. Europe correspondent Isabella Higgins reports.
In France, the battle in 41-degree heat is unrelenting as the fires sweep through areas south of Bordeaux. Two huge blazes have now spread over 110 square kilometres. Fire chiefs have been forced to split their resources.
We're dealing with two large fires that started almost at the same time. It's very difficult.
More than 16,000 people have been evacuated.
They told me to leave, but I wanted to stay. So they came a second time and gave me 5 minutes to pack.
Exhausted firefighters catch sleep where they can.
We're seeing a big difference with climate change. We notice the ground is getting drier and drier.
It's an especially difficult summer. We are dealing with considerable drought, and now we have high temperatures.
Those same conditions shared in neighbouring Spain. This blaze in the Catalonia region is now burning out of control, just one of the 30 wildfires raging across the country. Hundreds of firefighters have been called to battle this blaze, quickly spreading near residential areas, and they've got a fight on their hands. The smoke is affecting visibility, testing the teams even more. Residents of this threatened house were among the many ordered to evacuate from the dozens of fire zones across Spain. Some were given little notice.
We've just grabbed a few essentials and just ran, really, and by that stage everybody along the street, the calle, was on the move.
I'm hurt and my wife's family farm has burnt to the ground.
The family farm is gone, all of it.
Malaga beachgoers had a front row seat to watch a firefighting plane fill up with seawater before heading back out to the fire zone, where the blazes have been threatening towns for the past 2 days. For now, there'll be little relief, with forecasters saying Spain's hot, dry conditions are set to continue. Isabella Higgins, ABC News.
In China, more than a dozen people have been killed and thousands of others displaced by flash flooding. Torrential rain has triggered landslides and left many roads and homes underwater in provinces in the country's southwest and northwest. Around 5,000 people have already been evacuated from their homes and rescue operations are ongoing. In the worst affected areas, almost twice the monthly average rainfall for July fell in under 2 days. A probe into the Uvalde school shooting in Texas has found poor decision-making and a lack of leadership contributed to the high death toll.
Am I bleeding? Am I bleeding? Am I bleeding?
Newly released police body cam footage shows local police entering the school just minutes after the teenage gunman. Investigators said that nearly 400 law enforcement responders who were at the scene had failed to prioritise saving innocent lives over their own safety. They said it took more than an hour of unfolding chaos before the shooter was confronted and killed.
That day, several officers in the hallway or in that building knew or should have known there was dying in that classroom. And they should have done more, acted with urgency, tried the door handles, tried to go in through the windows, tried to distract him.
19 children and 2 teachers were killed in the attack in May. After more than 100 days of evidence, the defamation case launched by Ben Roberts-Smith has entered its final phase. The war veteran's lawyers began their closing address today by telling a Sydney court he was an exceptional soldier whose reputation was destroyed.
It's been called the trial of the century, a proxy war crimes trial and an attack on press freedom. But Ben Roberts-Smith's barrister says this case is none of those things. This has been a case about how Mr. Roberts-Smith, the most decorated Australian soldier and a man with a high reputation for courage, skill and decency in soldiering, had that reputation destroyed. Destroyed, he argued, by stories in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the Canberra Times in 2018, which included false allegations of unlawful killings, bullying and domestic violence. Mr. Moses claimed they were based on rumour, hearsay and contradictory accounts from former colleagues who were, some, jealous and or obsessed with Mr. Roberts-Smith. Publisher Nine Entertainment relied on a truth defence. The Victoria Cross recipient was accused of committing or being complicit in 6 murders in Afghanistan. Arthur Moses criticised journalists Nick McKenzie and Chris Masters for writing what he called sensationalist accounts. He said Ben Roberts-Smith is entitled to the presumption of innocence. Nine's barrister Nicholas Owens repeated what he said at the start of these hearings, that the judge has been presented with irreconcilable accounts and is now confronted with the dilemma that someone is lying. Mr. Owens also highlighted the civil standard of proof. No matter how grave the allegation, Your Honour is only required to find it more probable than not. Each side has 4 days overall for closing submissions. Jamie McKinnell, ABC News, Sydney.
To finance now, and Suncorp has agreed to sell its bank to ANZ for close to $5 billion. Here's Alan Kohler.
The head of the ACCC, Gina Cass-Gottlieb, has been in the job for just 4 months, and now she has a bank merger to adjudicate. We haven't had one of them since Westpac bought St George and Commonwealth bought Bankwest in the GFC. Today, Brisbane-based Suncorp agreed to sell its bank to ANZ for $4.9 billion, which will increase the Melbourne-based bank's customer base by 1.2 million, mostly banana benders. Other regional bankers were up in arms today, saying it'll reduce competition, so the ball is firmly in the ACCC's court. Now, I'm not saying this is the reason ANZ decided to spend $5 billion buying a Queensland bank, but its shares have been by far the worst performing of the big four this year. Down 21% versus 7.5% for CBA, 7% for Westpac and just 1% for NAB. So arguably ANZ had to do something. ANZ went into a trading halt today while they took the hat around shareholders to raise $3.5 billion at a discount of 12.7%. While Suncorp jumped more than 5% on the news that it's about to become just an insurance company with tons of cash. The other banks all went up, as did mining companies, and the All Ordinaries rose 1.3%. There were big gains on global markets today and Friday, led by a 2% rise in New York. The main moves on commodity markets were a 2.2% fall by iron ore and a 1.3% rise by oil. And the Australian dollar is back to just under 68 US cents, up from last week's low point of 66.8. Now, the United States Misery Index, which is derived by adding together inflation and unemployment, is the highest it's been in 40 years. But they should perhaps add mass shootings as well for a more accurate reading. And that's finance.
Australian Cameron Smith is the toast of the golfing world after winning the historic 150th British Open at the spiritual home of the sport, St Andrews. Smith produced a spectacular back nine to secure a one-shot victory over American Cameron Young for his first major title.
And the champion golfer of the year is Cameron Smith.
It had been a matter of when, not if, Cameron Smith would win a major. The 28-year-old joins players like Jack Nicklaus, Tiger Woods and Peter Thompson as Open winners at St Andrews.
Every player that's been at the top of their game has won this championship, so yeah, it's pretty cool to be on there.
Smith had been 3 shots behind leader Rory McIlroy at the 10th hole before applying the pressure with a birdie blitz.
Here we go.
The Northern Irishman McIlroy had most of the crowd support, but wasn't quite getting the rub of the greens. With the bold play that's been a feature of his rise in the sport, the world number 6 gave himself a chance to avoid a bogey at the 17th. With nerves of steel, Smith soon had one hand on the claret jug.
Oh my goodness.
He's owned his game, I think, quickly. I think his mind is a bigger asset as his putter.
An eagle at the last hole from American Cameron Young meant Smith needed a birdie to win, and he wasn't going to let this chance slip.
Brilliant, quite brilliant.
All the hard work we've done has really started to pay off, and this one definitely makes it worth it.
Smith is the 5th Australian to win the Open and the first since Greg Norman in 1993. The Great White Shark offered his congratulations on social media and told Smith he was in good company. But a question on whether Smith might be lured to Norman's Saudi-backed Live Tour was out of bounds, according to the new champion.
I just won the British Open and you're asking about that. I think that's not that good.
Of more concern was how many beers fit in the famous trophy.
I'll probably have about 20 claret jugs.
At the Wantima Country Club in Brisbane, where Smith learnt his trade, his proud father relived the triumph on TV after cancelling a planned trip to St Andrews.
He was rubbing it into me about not going as well, so I'll hear about that for a while.
But there's likely to be more opportunities in the coming years to be present for a Cameron Smith major victory. Duncan Huntsdale, ABC News.
The Hockeyroos have won bronze at the Women's World Cup in Spain with a come-from-behind 2-1 victory over Germany. Germany scored the first goal of the match in the first quarter. It took Australia until the final quarter before Steph Kershaw scored the equaliser. Kershaw struck again minutes later to score the winner and secure the bronze.
It's all over, and it is Australia who are the bronze medal winners. They've scored 2 goals in the final quarter to shatter German hearts and turn this game on its head.
The Netherlands defeated Argentina 3-1 in the final to claim the World Cup. Australia's women's cricket team has comprehensively beaten Ireland in a T20 in the UK in preparation for this month's Commonwealth Games. Spin bowler Alana King claimed 3 wickets for 9 as Ireland posted a modest score of 99. Australia reached that total in the 13th over thanks to a solid partnership from Beth Mooney and Meg Lanning. Now with the weather, here's Annie Kearney again.
Thanks, Tam. Back again. And it was very chilly today, as everyone at home would know, but the skies are clearing and that weather is settling thanks to a high pressure system. But it's going to bring a run of cool days and cold and frosty nights, with Melbourne dropping to somewhere between -4 and 1. It wasn't so cold last night. Temperatures were around 1 to 7 degrees. It didn't warm up too much from there, though. Highs were about 2 to 4 degrees below average. It was warmest in the northwest of the state, and pretty dry too. The most rain recorded was 8 millimetres at Mount Donabuang. In the city, we dipped to 7.2 degrees at 4 this morning and hit a not so high of 11.4 degrees at around 1:30 this afternoon. Right now, it's just a degree cooler in the city. Around the rest of the country, it was cold in Tasmania, South Australia and New South Wales too today as that cold front moved through. In Tasmania, snow settled as low as 150 metres in the south and the west. It looks pretty impressive from the CBD there. And in far southern Tasmania, snow flurries were observed at sea level. Those snow levels across Victoria and southern alpine New South Wales will remain around 800 metres into early tomorrow. And with that cold front clearing, a large high pressure system is moving and strengthening over the southeast of the country, with conditions expected to be settled for much of the rest of the week, while a trough and low are driving showers and the odd storm in southern and southwest WA. So for the capitals tomorrow, partly cloudy and 19 in Perth, Melbourne partly cloudy and 12, 12-2 in Adelaide, mostly cloudy there and in Hobart. Some morning frost in Canberra, 15 in showers in Sydney and 30 and sunny in Darwin. Back home, and it'll be cool and partly cloudy day with some areas of morning frost and fog. Severe frost will be possible in the northeast and dry apart from some isolated showers in East Gippsland. On the bays, southeasterly 10 to 15 knots, tending easterly in the morning, waves below a metre. Some frost is expected across much of the state with warnings for crop damage. Quite a long list tonight, as you can see, while sheep grazier's warning is in place just for the central district. So for Melbourne tomorrow, mostly sunny with the chance of morning frost about the hills. And we get our first taste of the cold mornings, a minimum of 3 with a top of 12. Looking at later in the week, it'll be a degree warmer on Wednesday with some early fog and frost and then sunny. As I mentioned earlier, if we drop to 1 on Wednesday, that will be our coldest morning in 4 years. And then that frost is sticking around a little later in the week too. On Thursday, we'll have a maximum of 15, 17 on Friday and mostly sunny, and partly in cloud and 16 on Sunday.
Thanks so much, Annie. Stay with us now for 7:30.
Welcome to the program. We've all seen the huge number of